My name is Robert Hyde. I'm the president of Payment Source, and with me today is Kathleen Butler, director at the CRA. And we're here to talk about government payments. Great, so we got the presentation up. So we'll talk a little bit about these individuals here on this slide here. I call them my friends. They're all the friends I kind of have at this point because I work a lot. But there's a great story there that we want to talk about. So most people understand and know who the CRA is. So there's not probably a lot of introduction needed in that regard, but most people in this room probably do not know who Payment Source is. So we'll talk very briefly about who we are, and then we'll move forward in terms of the case study and how we've worked together as a kind of public-private partnership. So we empower inclusion, which at the end of the day means that we bring payors and payees together in alternative means. So we allow them to pay for services or exchange with each other in ways that are non-traditional. So for example, we allow cash payments for e-commerce transactions, and we work with government-type organizations to allow things like credit card transactions. So we do about 500 million a year in terms of volume, and we're a pretty fast-growing, dynamic company. And that's about all I'll say about us, and then I will pass it to Kathleen to tell a little bit of the story of CRA and what they're doing to modernize their payment infrastructure.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm Kathleen Butler. I'm the director responsible for an area called Horizontal Programs Division at Canada Revenue Agency. That doesn't sound very meaningful in and of itself. Basically, the refunds that go out the door is through my operations, and the payments that come in the door, as well as the back-end ledgers that balance it all in the end. And so volume-wise, in terms of situating us in the space, do a volume of about 40 million payments a year, so 40.5 last year, value of upwards of $500 billion. So not insignificant. About 80% of the payments come to us electronically, so that's a good news story. Not just because I'm passionate about all things electronic, but because ultimately I've got to run a processing operation. And that processing operation, I need to get payments processed quickly, effectively, and inexpensively. And so so having those electronic payments, it allows me to achieve that, because the less I need to worry about manual intervention, the more sustainable it is, especially given the climate literally we've had lately, fire, flood, natural disaster, whatnot. I need to be able to get staff that are in the office that can process the payments, and having the electronic means of paying means that the funds keep flowing, which is great. You've got the clicker? So.
I do.
Okay, great. So we'll stay on the slide here.
Yeah.
So ultimately, we had sort of made a few efforts in terms of trying to move Canadians off of a traditional sort of check-based model to something that's a little bit more electronic. We're really only seeing modest gains. What we really seemed to be doing was really shifting people from electronic means A to electronic means B. We weren't really moving the needle in terms of those check remitters. Ran some demographic analysis to see who are these people who are writing me checks. And so we looked at what do they make? Where do they live? Are they French? Are they English? Are they married? Are they single? Do they have kids? What sort of field are they in? Looking at it across the spectrum. And really what we saw was it's pretty even Steven. They're male, they're female, they're rich, they're poor, they're young, they're old. Across the board, we're receiving checks. Disproportionately maybe high with individuals who use a tax practitioner, and disproportionately high maybe in Quebec. But otherwise, pretty much, grosso modo, I receive checks across the board. So I have 19% of the Canadians who reside in rural locations. Maybe I haven't been serving them as well as I could have. As I start to move in the electronic space, at least from what I'd been reading, I was seeing that we weren't maybe serving that population as well as we could have, because some of the electronic offerings aren't necessarily there. 87% of Canadians have the internet access. 85% of households have mobile phones. So thinking maybe there's something I can do there, and that's where somebody like Payment Source came in. As I said, it's not that I'm anti-check. It's that I need something that's sustainable, that's inexpensive to be able to run. So we started talking about new offerings we could initiate. We started talking about credit cards and debit cards and in-person and the return on investment of something like that, and the cost of doing business, and it wasn't seeming feasible. And then we sort of had to take that step back and say, like, ultimately, what are we doing here? Like, is it, we're trying to sort of decide what Canadians want. We're trying to decide what we're going to offer to Canadians. But who are we to judge? Canadians know what they want. So what do I really want? Well, what I want is I want to be innovative. I want to be nimble. I want to be current. I want to be responsive to the changing needs of Canadians. And I'm the government of Canada, so I can't necessarily do that at the speed that I'd like to be able to do. But leveraging private industry, maybe there's an opportunity there. So that's where we partnered up to allow Canadians to sort of self-serve and get that in-person experience. And what was great about it was that we have an in-person experience where people feel good. They've parted with their money, yes, but they've dealt with a human at the other end. But on the back end, I get an electronic data interchange transmission. So on the back end, I get that electronic piece. What it meant was that last year, I saw about a 4% increase in my payment volume. Last year, I saw an extra $35 billion come in the door. And it not only didn't cost me more to process those payments, it actually cost me less. So my processing costs in terms of running the payment operation for Canada Revenue decreased, and my payments increased. Now, anecdotally, I haven't looked into sort of what makes up the 4%. Was it people who were previously non-compliant who started to become compliant? I'm hoping so. I was looking to move the needle. In terms of checks, when I started in the job, I was at about volume of about 9 million checks a year. I keep saying 9 million checks. I need to get with the times. I'm actually closer to 7. This year, I'm trending 6.5. So sort of seeing that I'm finally moving the needle in terms of some of that checks type experience. Yeah. So then on the next slide, it's I won't sort of linger on this particular one. Our comms guys, it sort of worked through different personas. We serve all Canadians. We serve Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and some are very sophisticated, very knowledgeable about taxes, and others are more in the vulnerable population, very much in need situation. And when I build something, because I'm Government of Canada, I have to build it for all of them. I have to build it for all Canadians. So I need to find a product that I need to get a web page and a product and a service that meets the needs of this entire spectrum, which is very challenging. I can tailor my comms messages and I can do different niche things. But overall, when I'm building something new, I've got to try to build it for this entire spectrum. And again, that's where somebody like private industry comes in. They can focus on a niche market. I can't. I'm the Government of Canada. I have to focus on the entire country. I have to focus on everybody. But leveraging an industry partner means that they maybe can focus on a particular segment and get something that's a little slicker, that focuses that sort of that niche a little bit better. In terms of the next slide, is sort of just some general stats that I thought might be mildly interesting. Everything is trending the way I would hope things are trending. I mean, since sort of bringing in the new service, I'm seeing that the online financial institution payments, and I think this is probably across the board anyways, especially listening to the talk this morning, online FIs are up. Checks are dropping slightly at about 4%. I'd like to see that drop a little bit more, but it's fairly steady. Post-dated checks, it's dropping a little bit. It's not a huge volume, but it is a huge annoyance. In-person FI seems to be dropping again. Maybe people are getting that experience at Canada Post and they don't need to walk into a financial institution. Credit cards have been fairly popular. Still early days, so that's fairly low volume take-up, but the percentage is looking pretty solid. In terms of the payment continuum, I mean, it's a bit of a success story from the conference itself. We were at the conference a couple of years ago. We met the folks from Payment Source. We're talking about a bit of a business problem that we had in terms of being able to move people off of check payment to something that's a little bit slicker and a little on the back end is electronic. 2 years ago at the May 2017 conference, we announced a soft launch of being able to pay your taxes at the Canada Post outlet, very much a soft launch. And that was a conscious decision on my part. If I were to come in and say, I want this whole whiz-bang, means of payment, it's all, I'm going to revolutionize everything, I wouldn't have it in today. So by starting slow and incrementally growing, as we saw how things were playing out in the space, adding the QR code to the paper vouchers for people, when we launched it, you had to go to a website to access the QR code. People still did it, but ultimately I have 19% of my population reside in northern and rural locations. I was looking to provide something to people who maybe don't have access to internet in the same manner, but yet they still came. Adding it to the paper vouchers, allowing them to self-generate the vouchers, integrating into the software experience, allowing them to generate the QR codes right as soon as you're filing your taxes. And at this stage, looking to, we've been working on an API to be able to allow to interoperate even more. In terms of a bit of a volume comparison, as you see on the slide, it's early days, right? So the first bar doesn't really tell much of a story except for the fact that we soft launched. We soft launched, and it was purposeful. I hadn't convinced everybody this was a grand idea. It was something that they were willing to let us try, which I really appreciate the opportunity to experiment and see if something works. So the soft launch allowed us to be able to do that. We were able to see, is it something that's going to resonate? I was getting a little bit of pushback on the fact that Canadians were going to have to pay a fee to make their payment. Were we sure that Canadians actually wanted to do this? What kind of noise, what kind of chatter would this result in? How would this play in the space? And what I saw was the response was positive. So we programized it, I guess, for lack of a better word, in that sort of first real year. And we saw just a decent growth. Still, you won't have seen a lot of big whiz-bang advertising on our part. It's yet another choice we offer Canadians. You want an in-person solution? You want something else? It's available to you. This is just strictly speaking about the Canada Post in-person bricks and mortar experience. So we saw quite a significant jump. And then this year again, just sort of business as usual. It's choice we're offering Canadians. The month of April alone, I'm almost at half of what I did the entirety of last year. So it's definitely something that's resonating in the space. And having a bit of a willing partner in crime, I guess I'd say, in the form of Payment Source, allows me to be innovative and nimble, allows me to better serve Canadians and their payment needs. And that's my portion. I'm going to pass the reins on to Robert to speak a little bit more about what we've done.
Great. So no fintech can talk without having personas, so I'm going to also have my personas. And I'm going to introduce you to a few. The first one I'm going to talk about is Steve. So Steve is very savvy. Steve uses his mobile device for everything. He loves his online banking solution, and he uses his online bill payment to pay his bills. He has a credit card. He's every kind of standard individual that you want to think about. But the key point is, this is not about Steve. So Steve is not who I'm interested in serving. And banks, you can all breathe a sigh of relief. I'm not coming after your business. There's no way that I'm going to get anywhere near the volume that a bank would do. But we serve very particular use cases. So this is Chris. Chris is rural, and he's a farmer. But he's also a business. He has his own business, because a farm is ultimately a business. So he has all the challenges of running his own business. He's got costs, he's got expenses, and it just so happens that Chris just bought a huge purchase of seeds, because he's going to plant his crops for the season. And it just happens to be in April. So Chris doesn't have a lot of cash, right? So how does online banking serve Chris? How can he pay his taxes, right, if he actually doesn't have a lot of cash flow? So we're about helping people like Chris. Jin. So Jin loves points. She loves to collect them. She loves to travel. She wants to travel many times and all over the world, and she's always looking for that next discount, that next way of kind of accumulating points. I'm sure this resonates with a few people here. I'm sure there's a few people who love to collect their points. But how can I collect points when I do something as standard or straightforward or mundane as make a tax payment? How do I do that? Right? So we're about servicing Jin. And then Suzanne. Suzanne is young, and she works in a cafe. And she often gets a lot of tips. And those tips are still in cash, right? She gets a mixture of pay, but she gets a bunch of cash, and now she's holding a lot of cash. Maybe she's keeping it in a little jar at home because she doesn't know where she's going to put it. She doesn't want to go to the bank every day and put a whole bunch of cash. So she ends up having a bunch of it sitting in a jar at home, right? Now, she may want to make a tax payment as well, and she wants to make use of that cash. So how does she do that? So those are three very distinct examples of the niche and the customers and the segments that we serve, right? So as Kathleen said, 80% of people are absolutely fine with what we have today. They don't need anything else, right? The banks do a great job of servicing that 80%. It's about that other 20% maybe it's even 10%, but there's a significant portion of the population that we need to think about and we need to include. So our mantra is empowering inclusion. And at the end of the day, it's about how do you bring everybody in and level the playing field for all Canadians, right? There's different reasons and there's different motivations for why someone would want to use a certain method, so why not give them that choice? But when you get into the government in particular, there's a whole bunch of barriers that present themselves, right? It's not as easy to just say, oh, let's go introduce this new payment method, because maybe that payment method will actually take a lot of cost and a lot of effort to implement. And as Kathleen said, maybe it changes things by 1%, right? So are you going to spend all that money or that effort to move the needle 1%? It's pretty hard to justify, right? So there's department structures. Each department may have its own data set around how it's receiving that information. Very different formats. So the remittance data that goes with that payment, very different. The diversity of the base is massive in the government in the sense that, you know, private enterprise can pick and choose their customers. They can say, this is the group we're going to serve, and these are the options we're going to give them because those are the options that are going to best serve those customers. But government doesn't have that option. They have to serve all of their constituents. And so how do they do that in a way that's most effective and allows them to kind of digitize those payments and bring down and manage their costs? So what is the journey that we did with the CRA? So as Kathleen mentioned, we met at this very conference a number of years back. And I think it's a testament to the fact that, you know, we met in August and we had our first iteration of a service available the following May. So to most private enterprises, that would be, wow, that took a long time. But anyone who's worked with the government would say, wow, that's like you did something in 9 months within the same year. Like, that's amazing. And kudos actually to Kathleen, because she just made it happen. So she's been a great partner. So we started with this pay in person. And what it does is effectively, it allows a user to either receive a QR code on the remittance voucher or come to our website and generate a QR code. Then they can take that into any Canada Post. That's scanned by the clerk, and that clerk can accept a payment over the counter in all 6,000 Canada Posts. Great coverage. So you're looking at 90% of the Canadian population is within 5 kilometers of a Canada Post, and 80% is within 2 kilometers of a Canada Post. So the coverage is unbelievable in terms of, it's actually the best retail network in Canada, bar none. So we didn't stop there. So we started that was our first step with them. But then we said, well, people want to be able to use other methods as well. And how would you feel about us bringing other payment methods that you're not currently doing today, that where we can serve a niche and provide more choice? And Kathleen said, will it cost me anything? And I said, no. She said, great. I'm kind of paraphrasing. So we launched Pay Simply. And Pay Simply is an online portal that allows people to use their credit card or PayPal, or use the in-person to generate the QR code. So really it provides choice and new mechanisms and new methods of making those payments. And we also then added an e-transfer option in October of this past year. So we're adding new capabilities and new payment methods on one side. We've also recently started working with Alipay. So we're kind of getting into the Chinese payment space and those types of payment methods. But where it really becomes interesting is when we look beyond just our own immediate partnership and look to a broader ecosystem. So we were really excited this April to announce our partnership with TurboTax and Intuit. So again, we see there's a lot of potential there, but what it means is a person who is filing their taxes using TurboTax, they go into that online experience or the desktop experience, and at the end of that process, if they owe money, right, we are an option that they can click through, and we carry them deep into the site so they don't have to pick the right type of tax, they don't have to make all those choices. They go right deep into that part of our website. They complete their payment, choose the payment method, and they're done. So it gives them great comfort. They get it done immediately. They're compliant, and they're happy. Now, there's other methods there too. So we're not saying that we're going to be the majority of the users or the majority of the traffic, but we are about providing alternatives. That's, at the end of the day, we are alternative payments, and that's what we do. So we see lots of potential in that relationship and with the CRA to kind of go forward. We've recently started doing work with cities, so we're looking to really expand our presence there and do the same sorts of things to enable new forms of payment for cities. So this is the Pay Simply website. I encourage you all to go look at it if you get a chance. Maybe even use it to try making a payment if you really like to collect points. There's lots of options there. And some of the options cost more than others. And so there's a variety of choice around budget and need, effectively. And the feedback has actually been really good. So we have a rating of about 4.5 out of 5 for our users. This is some of the feedback we've received. But ultimately, we look constantly to that user feedback in trying to improve that experience and give them more options and more choice to pay. So why does this work for government? I think the first bullet is the primary one. It has no cost. So it's all a consumer pay, constituent pay model. And ultimately, if we can implement something that only requires a link on a website from that organization and everything else is turnkeyed, that's a great answer. And we believe that choice leads to more compliance, leads to faster payments, and brings people on side. And ultimately, because of our options around Canada Post and these in-person solutions, regardless of your technical comfort or your comfort online or your comfort in technology, there's ways of enabling this to be digitized. So if you think about it, there's a remittance voucher that can be generated either by a tax professional or by the CRA that's sent in the mail. It's a piece of paper. A person can take a piece of paper with a QR code, walk to an in-person experience, have a scan happen, hand over money or do their debit card, and it's completely digitized from the perspective of the government. So very inclusive, allows that customer to have the experience they want, because maybe they're not comfortable, right, in that world. And so how do we make sure that we're bringing all of those people together, right? So it's not about Steve, right? It's about Chris, it's about Jin, and it's about Suzanne. And that's it. It's the story. Thank you. So we did actually really good time. We were practicing this, and we thought we'd only have like 3 minutes or so for questions, but we actually have 8.
I just wanted to add one point, Rob, that I forgot to mention in my own talk, was that I was surprised at how quickly we had take up in every geographic region in the country. And I get a weekly sort of a breakdown from my own team about where they actually draw me up a map once a week about where the new locations are. And just today I heard about Rankin Inlet, sort of, a new series of payments being made there. So really are seeing the northern communities, Inuktitut, Uluktutuk, like places I can nowhere near pronounce, but they're really feeling that they're getting that service. So it was refreshing for me to see that every single province and territory I'm seeing the payments, and I'm seeing a good representation in my northern communities, which is excellent.
Any other questions?
Does the service encompass all types of CRA payments? So personal, business, GST, so I'm assuming the QR code allows for like the scanning of the remittance information that would need to go, like number of employees or other things?
So yes, we started, as I said, we started small. So we started with the T1 individual filers. That was what we launched in May. We followed it up, I think, in July with the business payments. We've expanded. We have 65 different remittance voucher types. All of them, I believe, Rob. I don't think there's any that we've left that are available for the payment method.
Yeah. So even things like Nova Scotia workers' comp, which the CRA processes, comes through that system, and you can use our system now to do those payments as well.
And we additionally provided a lot of the specs to the software developers. I sit in on the annual software developers conference for the certified products that we have at the agency, and shared the QR code information so that they could then share it with their users who then want to make a payment. You know, maybe they want to make it in person, facilitating that QR code gets generated. And in some cases it gets printed and brought out, but in other cases they just bring their mobile phone right to the experience, which is really interesting.
It goes anywhere from about $3 for an in-person experience, and that's up to about a $1,000 payment. That's the price of that, and then it can go on the higher end. It's credit card payments. Obviously, the interchange of credit card is much more expensive, so that goes up to 2.5%.
The payments through the post office, is that just the CRA payments, or is that extended to all the other payment types you support?
So as we have expanded capabilities now, so we've recently added capability to do settlement for a whole bunch of different organizations, so including all the municipalities in Canada. We can actually settle without any work on their side through existing bank relationships. So that Canada Post then extends automatically to that group as well. It's really just about promoting it as an option for those organizations.
Does this solution work as well for non-residents? I'm with CBSA, and we have that constant struggle of trying to facilitate payments for non-resident importers. Will this work for non-residents?
Yeah, so we have cases where there's a customer who may be traveling or is overseas, but they're still Canadian, and they're making a payment with Canadian credit card. So it's really just it's all optional, yeah, depending on the partner. Yeah.
I do still get a higher volume of wire transfers than I'd like, so I'm still looking for additional solutions in that space. But yeah, I know, I hear your pain.
We do get like the Florida crowd, like we see when you look at geographically at where our payments come from. You see some from Florida, so the snowbirds in Florida or in Arizona on the West Coast. And, yeah.
Just a question in terms of one of the barriers for incoming payments is reconciliation. So what facilitates that? Is it the QR code, or is there more information attached?
It comes to me as a standard EDI file. So the QR code has the requisite information that would populate the same sort of EDI transmission that we would get from the financial institution. On my end, it looks and feels exactly like any other EDI payment.
And would that include, like, say, the SIN number?
Yes, it would, or the business number, depending. Mm-hmm. And we tracked it through when they first launched. Again, that was one of the reasons for the soft launch. We're very much a concern about what's this going to look like. Are they going to be allocated properly? Are we going to get into a situation where they go to account A and we really needed them to account B? So we actually tracked those through from end to end, because we were at a slightly lower volume when we launched. It gave us the luxury of being able to do that. And then, like I said, I run the ledgers program as well, and I haven't seen any anomalies in terms of payment processing or my ledgers.
Sure. So specifically for municipalities, all the payment options, pretty much all the payment options, not exactly identical, but pretty close, are available for municipalities as well. And through a bank partnership, we actually settle funds through that normal bank partnership approach. So from that municipality's perspective, it's like an online bill payment. So they receive it as if they were receiving an online bill payment, with the account information and the remittance data associated to that attached. And so, ultimately, it's really just about allowing that municipality to present us as an option on their website or when people ask how they want to pay. And it's as simple as that. And we do, right down to a dedicated deep link where we can go right to that municipality's particular payment type. So if it's about property tax payment, that's one thing. If it's about the water, that's another way of driving it. And then again, you can use the Canada Post solution, credit card, and Alipay we now offer as well. And then we are adding PayPal to that very shortly. E-transfer, yeah.
Normally the tax data comes the very next day.
Yeah, so the Canada Post is same day because it's effectively a government-to-government payment. So that's being recognized as same day from that payment perspective. Credit card, you're right, takes a couple more business days because we have to move through the settlement process with the acquirer. Right. Any other questions? Didn't see this side. Okay, well, that's it. Thank you. Come see
Thank
us
you very
after.
much. Appreciate it.